When I was a little girl, every year my grandmother made heart-shaped tea-like sugar cookies with pink icing for Valentine's Day. To this day, when Valentine's Day comes around, I think of those cookies. So I thought it would be fun to show you how adorable hearts and other cookie shapes can be on a tea tray for a Valentine's afternoon tea. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Sonia and I'm awfully glad you've stopped by. This recipe is fantastic because the cookies are not only tasty, but they don't spread during baking. How many times have you cut out cookies in cute little shapes with adorable details, only to have them puff up so much in baking that you can't recognize them? This recipe doesn't do that. So you will need butter, and I have cubed this right out of the refrigerator. You don't have to wait for it to get to room temperature. Sugar, egg, plain or all-purpose flour, cornstarch, salt, in this case kosher salt. Now if you don't have kosher salt, you could use about half of the amount in table salt, because table salt is going to be saltier, and vanilla extract. Now I will leave the full recipe in the description box, but I am cutting it in half because I'm making bite-sized cookies suitable for tea. You know, half the recipe makes about 40 cookies if they're small. And I'm going to be using these little heart-shaped cookie cutters and this square cookie cutter. So first we're going to preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 190 degrees Celsius, gas mark 5. So in my stand mixer, I'm going to add my sugar, and to that, the butter that I have cubed. And I'm going to mix this until smooth and combined. And now to that, I'm going to add my egg and vanilla. Now while that mixes, I'm going to sift the flour, the cornstarch, and the salt together. Now the sifted flour mixture, I'm going to add just a little at a time. Until it's fully mixed. You're looking for the dough to eventually form a ball and start pulling away from the sides of the mixing bowl. It should take a good 2 to 3 minutes for the whole process. Once you get the last bit in there, you want to kind of scrape down the sides of your bowl a little bit so you make sure and get all the ingredients mixed in. I think we are there. Ah, that's perfect. Okay, now I have a piece of parchment paper that I've put down here, and I have my little pastry mat underneath it simply to keep it from sliding around a little bit. If you don't have that issue on your countertop, you don't have to worry about it. But either parchment paper or a piece of waxed paper underneath is great, because I'm going to take this dough and cover it with another piece of parchment. And that's how I'm going to roll it out. And you're looking for about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch for your cookie. Just depends really on what you like. And you can always lift this up and see how it's going. By using parchment paper, you don't have to use any more flour, which I like. Okay, I think this is just about where I want it. Now, we can commence cutting. You see what you've got here? This is just kind of the perfect size. And I've got these on a baking sheet. You want to line it either with parchment or a silicone baking mat like this. And you don't have to worry about how close you put these cookies together on the mat because they are not going to spread. And these scraps can be re-rolled, and you can do this again. Let's get a few squares while we're here. I think this side of my dough got just a little thicker. We'll see how they all turn out. And now into the oven. They are ready to go. We're going to bake them between 9 to 12 minutes, taking them out when they are just barely browning around the edge. Then we'll let them cool completely on a wire rack before icing. These look perfect. They're still very light, as you would expect. But on the bottoms, let's see if I can turn one over for you. On the bottom, it's just beginning to brown a little bit. See, just browning around the edges? Those are done. And we're going to let these cool for about a half an hour because you want them completely cool when you start to ice them. And as you can see, these cookies have not spread at all. The detailing around the edge on the squares is still there. Okay, our cookies have completely cooled. Now comes the fun part, the icing. Okay, in my bowl here, I have powdered sugar that I have sifted after measuring. It's just a better idea to do that. And to that, I'm going to add my corn syrup. And again, I will put all these directions and recipe amounts in the description box. To that, I'm going to add milk. I'm using 2%. You can use whole. I don't know that I would use any less than 2%, but I suppose you could try it. And vanilla extract. And I have here my food coloring, but I'm not going to add it yet. I want to start with white icing. And this icing is going to look and feel really thick, but that is what you want because you want it to stay on the cookie instead of rolling off. I don't know if you can see that, but when you have the ribbons, you just want them to kind of stay in place for just a few seconds before they dissolve back into the icing. Now, I don't typically use a piping bag. I just usually grab a sandwich bag and I put it in a glass like this. Kind of get that corner in there. And then I just put my icing in here. And I find it easier to work with. I think that's enough to start with. do the very smallest, if you can see, the very smallest tip. I'm just outlining my squares because I'm going to make these love letters, the fronts of envelopes. I'm not taking this to the edge because sometimes when you end up filling these lines, filling the cookie, it can be so much that it ends up overflowing. And rather than have that happen, I'd rather have a little bit more cookie edge. Okay, and now when I go in, and I'm not going to fill completely, I'm just going to kind of get the icing in the center, and it will spread on its own. I just need to get enough and not too much. And then you can go back and coax it where you want it with a toothpick. Put a little bit more in there. Coax it to the edge. See what I've done? And I'll do the rest of these. A little bit more. Give myself a little more to work with. And as the icing settles, it will smooth itself out. And last one. I'll try to get all the little air holes out without going over my line. Okay, and there we are. There's a base for our love letters. Okay, now time for the hearts. I've turned my rack around so you can see it better and so I can get to the cookies better. And to the remaining icing that I have made, I'm going to add 1 drop of food coloring. And just mix that in really well. And that is just the color and the consistency I want. You don't have to add any more milk. In fact, you shouldn't, because you don't want your icing any more runny than this. Because again, you want it to stay on the cookie and not be dripping down the sides. Fresh bag. As you can see, there is plenty of icing. I halved this recipe as well, and there is plenty. Okay. Squeeze that off really well. Now cut just the tiniest little spot. Oh, a little more. Is that enough? Nope, that's enough. Okay. Nope, that's a little bit thin. a little bit small. Sorry, I'm not right-handed, so a little clumsy with it. Here we go. Make the line just a little bit bigger, but I'm just outlining it for the moment. I like to outline it first because then once I fill in, that line is just a little more set and it's less likely to allow any of the fill, ooh, that's not attractive, to let any of the fill run over the cookie. Okay, now let's do some fill-in. Just a couple. You can even, if you don't like your line, your original line, you can spread it just a little bit at this point while everything is still wet. Maybe round out those tops of the hearts a little better. It's also at this point that if you get any over the edge, you can wipe that at this point too before it hardens. And last one. There. And there are our hearts. Now I'm going to turn this back around where I can get to these little envelopes easier. And now I'm going to attempt to make little stamp hearts by just doing kind of a little U or a little V on one corner. My hope is that these will kind of spread enough to where they'll look like an actual heart. But bear with me, I'm not an artist. If these end up just being a big pink glob, you'll know what it's supposed to have been. All right. Now, we've got to let these dry. These cookies actually need several hours to dry. In fact, if you can do this in the afternoon and let them set overnight, that would be perfect. You could do them in the morning, let them have all day to set up. That would be great too. They will become stackable. This frosting is wonderful. It's kind of like royal icing in that it is very hardy, it's very durable, but at the same time, I think personally it tastes a lot better. So I'm going to wait a few hours and then I have one last thing to do to the envelopes and I'll show you. I have my darkest food color here and a paintbrush, and this is the thinnest, smallest paintbrush I could find. It's actually slanted, but I'm just going to use one tiny corner of it here. So I'm going to use one drop of this dark food coloring. Now it's supposed to be black, but it comes off more of a dark green, but that's okay. Whatever you have will be fine. To that one drop of food coloring, I'm going to add one drop of water. I'm going to mix that well with my brush and draw lines on the squares to resemble addresses. Ooh, that's a bit heavy-handed. Perhaps the next one will be better. Just the lightest touch is needed for these lines. Now we'll wait a few more hours, perhaps overnight, and I'll show you what they're like. Okay, next day. These are completely set. The cookie breaks easily, and inside it is soft and chewy and complemented by that wonderful icing. And there you have it, sweet little hearts and love letters for your Valentine's Day afternoon tea. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up by hitting that like button and consider subscribing for more afternoon tea videos. Until next time, bye-bye.